Welcome to the Divorce Allies podcast, a podcast and video series where we dive into all things divorce with a team of financial professionals, divorce coaches, parenting specialists, and divorce mortgage planning specialists. Today, we're with Melissa Gragg. I'm Victoria McCooey, and we're welcoming Stacy Francis, who is a nationally recognized financial expert with over 20 years of experience in the financial industry. She frequently appears in media outlets such as Forbes, Kiplinger, the Wall Street Journal, and USA Today. Stacy is dedicated to furthering the financial planning profession and is the director of the Association of Divorce Financial Planners, Greater New York Metro chapter, the National Association of Personal Finance Advisors, and the Financial Planning Association. And as much as 10% of all of Francis Financial, which is the company she founded and runs, goes to a charity, or lots of charities, but mostly her own charity called Savvy Ladies, which is a nonprofit organization she founded in an effort to educate and empower women to take control of their finances. And she's also the host of her own podcast called Financially Ever After. Welcome, Stacy. We've been so excited to have you.
Oh, Victoria, this is the highlight of my day. It's great to be here.
So Stacy and I have been friends for a long time, so I know all about how dedicated she is to shining a light on financial abuse and helping women understand their legal rights, and they're also emotionally to become unattached to a person who's financially abusive toward them. So let's just start right off the bat with how do you define and identify financial abuse?
I love that question because a lot of people listening probably actually haven't heard that term, financial abuse. We've heard about emotional abuse and physical abuse, and you bet you know if there is physical or emotional abuse going on in your household. But what is surprising is how few people realize that there's also financial abuse. My personal story is not realizing what financial abuse was and seeing how devastating it is and how it can really paralyze someone from being able to leave a marriage. And how you identify a financial abuse in my life and how you can see it with others is when someone's options to be able to leave a marriage become limited because they don't have access to the finances. They may be prevented from being able to work. Their paycheck may even go into a joint account and then be immediately transferred by their spouse to a separate account that they don't have access to. They may get harassing phone calls at work. Many of our clients have credit cards where every single purchase, their spouse gets a notification and then immediately is asking, given restrictive budgets that aren't even possibly feasible to live on, and therefore requiring that person to reach out for just even basic necessities, essentially pleading with that person. And this is all a form of control. And it's something that unfortunately we are seeing a rise in, especially during COVID and in a post-COVID world, and something that definitely your listeners need to know about.
Right. And what I hear women saying a lot of the time, when I sense that there's financial abuse with one of my clients, is they go, "But I don't make any money. I'm staying home with the kids, so that's fair," in their minds. What do you say to that?
Well, it's not fair because the definition of marriage is, and if you look under Webster's, one of the first words it says is that it is a economic union. It's not an economic, he makes more, it's his money, or an economic, he makes all the income, it's his money or hers, whatever. It's an economic union. Any money that is earned during the marriage is owned by both parties. And one of the techniques that perpetrators will use is changing the survivor's perception of who owns the money and who is allowed to then make decisions about the money and who is allowed to have access to the money. And so that's very important. I mean, I don't argue with Webster's. If it's a definition, it's a definition. Know that this is an economic union, and all those dollars are as much as yours as they are your partner's.
Right. So it's a mindset, right? They're being told. And so they believe that they're not worthy because they're not earning of making financial decisions. I don't know, it's a little known secret that the way Stacy and I bonded is because I was a guest on her podcast a million years ago about my financially, well, it's abusive in a lot of other ways too, but it was a very financially abusive marriage that I was first in. So I can testify to the fact that you do, and I was earning money. It turns out that I was earning more money than he was bringing in, but that's not the story I was being told. So whenever there was a question about whose needs came first, it was always his because he was the bread earner. So I believe that. And just like a stay-at-home mom who's not making money is told, you don't, you're not as important because I'm the one earning, right?
Yeah. And I want to use one of the words and really highlight that you said, Victoria, that I think is so powerful. Being worthy, right? Being worthy that in these relationships, and potentially some of you listening right now in your relationship, that your worthiness is being equated by what your earnings are, or your worthiness is being equated by your role in the finances. And that is 100% not true. But the perpetrators who are creating this abuse, they are doing that for a reason because they want to, in all ways, be able to push you down, push your self esteem down, push your confidence, push your money confidence down so that they can then control. They can control all the money and they can control you. And in this situation, money is just a tool. It's yet another tool that they are using to control you.
Do you know another thing I see is even when you do make a decision or buy something or uh, with their blessing or without their blessing, they will sabotage it in order for it to fail so that they can show you, you see, you don't know how to handle money. You're bad with money. You made a bad choice or a bad purchase or a mistake. Even at their own, detriment, it's worth it to them to reinforce this idea.
hmm Yeah, it's interesting because you look at the studies, even in relationships where there's not financial abuse, when women rate their money confidence compared to our male counterparts, we fall much lower on the scale regarding how confident we believe our capabilities are of managing and making good decisions around money. And there's a lot that goes into it. But part of it is, unfortunately, the the messages that we are being told, and maybe those were messages that we were told as we were growing up about women's role in money, and quite frankly, still messages now. And really, as women, one of the most wonderful things that we can do as a gift for ourselves is to stay involved with the finances because sometimes this can happen slowly over time. In some situations, it might be overnight where abuse starts to occur. Usually it's emotionally and then the financial abuse follows and sometimes even physical abuse. That can happen overnight. But financial abuse for most individuals, it doesn't happen on day one of your relationship. It's usually over time. And it might take the form of, you know what, I see you're so busy with the kids. Why don't I take over? Why don't I take over the bills? You know what, I see that you don't really enjoy this so much. Let me do that. And what I have to say, even if you think you're in a beautifully wonderful, healthy relationship that's going to be there for the rest of your life, you always need to stay involved with the finances, not only for yourself, but as a role model for your children, right? Because they're looking up to you and seeing how this works in a healthy relationship. But also, God forbid, your spouse, your partner becomes disabled or ill, or Lord knows what happens. 8 in 10 women are going to be solely responsible for their finances at one point in their life. So, pretty much 80%, right? And I don't like those odds. That means that most likely it's going to be me. It's going to be Melissa, and it's going to be you, Victoria. So,
It already
making
is.
sure, right? Making you already are, right? And you've seen that, right?
I watch every penny. I know I pay every bill. Look, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. Yeah,
But I think something that you guys will both resonate with is that when you have a pattern of narcissism and the money and control, is that typically they are identifying a partner that is compliant and is used to being taken care of or have somebody take care of the bills. And so when they enter into this new partnership and they're moving even from a familiar, a family environment that could have some narcissism in it, so they're used to it, and then they move into their spouse, you know, there's a lot that happens in there, but the one question that I would kind of get you to consider is, I've listened to some really brilliant therapists about narcissism, and they typically say if you're being abused in one area, then you're typically being abused in other areas. And so if you're in this situation where it's like a parent-child relationship with money, and I'm given an allowance and things are kind of in that same perpetuation of that family, how can you start to break some of those bonds? Because I'm really going against the patriarchy. I'm going against the system. I'm going against, my spouse who is that person who knows, controls everything. It's very difficult to kind of find your voice in that space, right? And to kind of to say, "Oh, let me look at the finances, but I don't know a lot about them." And we've kind of encouraged people to maybe go to the financial planner with your spouse or go to the accountant with your spouse and ask some questions, look at that tax return. But what other ways do you think, like even low key, can you start to gain some power and knowledge when it really is being controlled, you know?
That's such a great observation, Melissa, and you nailed it on the head. Like, start to go to those meetings with your accountant. Don't just sign your name on the tax return, but read through it and ask your accountant to take you through it. Make sure that you go to all the meetings with your financial advisor, um, and you know, reach out for support from you guys, right? The divorce allies, and how can I start to have those conversations with my partner? And quite a few of our clients will actually go into couples counseling, where there is a power imbalance and money is being used in a very unhealthy way. A thing that you can do that's very low key and maybe not as confrontational of we need a couples counselor, you have a problem, which usually doesn't work very well. You have to kind of weave through it. Um, this sounds pretty simple, but watch a really sad movie where the spouse dies, the wife is left with her hands up in the air and knows where none of the money is, knows where none of none of the passwords, and then say, "I just watched this movie," whatever movie that is. What what if that happens to me? To start that conversation and start to again educate yourself. Don't do one on divorce because your partner's not going to be so excited, but definitely like a sad death. And then I know. Tell me
A
about it.
sad, slow death.
A
No, it
sad
has to be a sudden death, actually.
Yeah, it has to be a sudden death, so she had no time to prepare, and the fact that she was not part of the finances throughout their partnership really detrimentally hurt her and hurt the kids. So that's something you can do just to start that conversation of, you know, where where is our money? Because you need to start to educate yourself. You do need to start to get involved. And there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons, but one of them I'll just throw there out there is that if you do end up moving down the path towards a separation or a divorce, just go ahead and triple or even double your legal fees if you are entering that situation without any knowledge of where all the assets are. Because also, a person who is a narcissist, a person who is an abuser, again, is trying to control the survivor. And the best way to them to wield that power is to essentially not release any financial information. And so you're having to hire attorneys to subpoena information, having to put subpoenas out to numerous financial institutions, and essentially trying to find a needle in a haystack. And you'll find some, but I can guarantee you're not going to find everything.
So I have two daughters stepdaughters actually, who are, one's about to get married, the other is not far behind. Do you see a shift in this generation coming up and how they perceive this dynamic, this financial marriage?
So the answer is an answer you're not going to expect. No. No, we're not. In fact, there was a survey that was just put out about a year ago that was looking at the different generations and how much they were taking over their finances, a fancy way of saying how involved were they with the finances for those that were married or partnered. And they found that actually millennials are the least engaged, millennial women are the least engaged with their money of any generation, worse off than baby boomers. Now, only, again, millennials, this is millennials and Gen Xers and baby boomers that were married. So, what we see is the crossover from her taking active role in her finances, gets married, that goes out the door. And that is where we are trying to catch women, particularly at Savvy Ladies, before they are getting married, teaching them the skills they need for lifelong good financial decision making. That if you love yourself, if you love your partner, you will continue to be involved in the finances for the rest of your life. And that's very scary to me that actually is happening, that so many women are giving up their power. But unfortunately, that is what's happening.
So involvement in the finances as self-care.
100% self-care. I mean, I get my butt to the gym and work out, and my goal is 5 days a week. But okay, let's be honest, let's be real. It's 3, maybe it's 4. But you know what? I do it. And I do it because fitness is really good for my health. Well, financial fitness is right up there too. It really is. And if you're not doing that, you can find yourself in some really boxed into some really awful situations. And my grandmother was one of them. Um, it's not normal for a 26-year-old to go decide to start a charity, which I did at age 26 to really teach financial literacy to women and help with one-on-one free financial counseling. But I saw how women who are in financially abusive relationships can have their options in life absolutely reduced and in many ways taken away. My grandmother was one of those women, and there was emotional abuse, there was financial abuse, and there was physical abuse. And she couldn't leave. And she couldn't leave because she was trapped financially. He was very smart, and he used money to control her, and she ended up dying. I ended up losing my grandmother far too young. My children never got to meet her. She, tragically was killed by him. And I take that and that trauma in my life to try and share that message that this is not a nice to know, right? It's not about like what type of shellac stays the longest on your nails when you go get a manicure. This is a like have to know. And it's about, again, loving yourself. It's about loving your children. And it's also, quite frankly, about loving your partner. Because if you are in a healthy relationship, it is not right to put all of the financial stress and decision making on one partner. That is something you do together.
Well, that leads us to another topic, prenup.
Prenups.
How do you feel about prenups?
Okay, so I think that prenups can be very powerful and very important. But I I think of it almost like starting off with a fruit sundae. You can have that fruit sundae, and it's a beautiful, healthy fruit sundae, or you could not pay attention and put, essentially maybe whipped cream on top and a few other chocolate sauces, and all of a sudden you have a sundae that's not so good for you. Prenups, done correctly, can protect you and make sure that you are going to have a financially secure life, whether your marriage continues or does not. Prenups are also very important if you are bringing assets to the marriage that you earned before the marriage. Very important if you have children from a previous marriage as well. But typically, when we're brought in, is when I say a prenup went bad. She signed a prenup, and maybe it was even a week before her marriage, put in front of her saying that she walks away with $1 million at the end of the marriage and maybe XYZ in assets that she brought. And the marriage ends 20 years later. And now what together they built might be worth 30 million, 40 million. I had a case where she had $1 million prenup. He had a business that he started during the marriage that was worth over $100 million. So it's very important to have the correct legal advice when you are signing a prenup, to think about not only the financial situation today, but the financial situation tomorrow, and to make sure that you are not limiting your ability to be able to have equitable distribution that should happen. So there's just a lot to think about when it comes to prenups. And again, the right legal advice is just absolutely imperative. And I will tell you is that if a prenup has been signed and it's not been signed under duress, which typically means it's not given to you right before the marriage, or and you've actually had legal representation. Even in my mind, if it's unconscionable, it can be very, very difficult to put aside. So again, really important to be careful with that.
So, we help women come up with their own ideas around a settlement offer. So, can you offer us any advice, long-term strategies for creating a settlement agreement?
So the first piece, and the word that I love that you used, Victoria, is long term. Sometimes we think very short term, and I'll tell you, when you're in a painful, traumatic situation, I know the first thing I like to do is try and get out of it. and stop that pain. And so some of our clients will make decisions about that settlement agreement, essentially leaving money on the table just to get things done and to be able to move on with their life. One of the most important strategies is to think long term and not make just short term decisions, because these are decisions that are going to impact the rest of your life. So, number one, know that this is a marathon, this is not a sprint. Most of the divorces that we work on um, have take years, as sad as I have to say that. So keeping yourself healthy mentally and physically is very important. Number two, make sure you have the right team around you to guide you, to advocate for you, to sometimes even lift you up when you can't lift yourself up. And that is someone to help you with the mental health and the emotional strength, someone from the financial, someone from the legal at minimum. And I would say also to ideally have that settlement modeled out for you. So based on an asset split of me taking this much in retirement, this much in taxable assets, taking the home, and a child support and spousal support number of X, Y, and Z, where am I based on my expenses? Sometimes it might work, but there are times where it doesn't. And you don't want to be making decisions about your future in a vacuum. Having as much information from your team as possible so that when you are making decisions, you're making them from a place of knowledge, you're making them from a place of empowerment so that you are going to be secure financially, not only today, but really for the long term. Um, those would be, I'd say, the three things to really think about. And there's a lot of detail we can go into, like, should you take the RSUs, or instead, should you be taking the private equity, or should you be, right? There's a lot of other things there, but again, the right experts on your team are going to be able to educate you and tell you the pros and cons, everything that you need to know.
So here's something funny that I always think about. In old movies or old sitcoms, was always like, the wife takes the guy to the cleaners. Oh, my ex-wife, took everything. Have you ever seen that happen?
Yeah, no.
It doesn't happen.
No, I mean, there's only been a few cases where we've been able to advocate and have a judge come down to get significantly more in assets for our client than the other partner, because typically what they're trying to do is they're doing usually a 50-50 equitable distribution, but there are ways that you can get more. So we have one client that ended up with like an 80-20. She received 80. Okay, now there was a story because we caught her husband hiding assets, and the judge was so angry that he said, any assets that we have today on the books and in the future that are found, she's getting 80%. So yeah, but you don't
That's
yeah, you
rare.
don't see that. And the going to the cleaners, yeah, nothing is going to happen where someone's taken to the cleaners. It's usually back, Victoria, it's usually back to that person's mentality that this is all my money. I earned it. When again, we have to remember marriage economic union. From the day you got married, any earnings during that marriage, whether they are yours or your partner's, they are there for, those are marital assets, right? Those are marital assets. And it's really important because even people will say, usually gentlemen, they'll say, my IRA, my 401k. Okay, yes, you're correct. It's in your name. You can't hold those in joint accounts. But was it saved and earned during the marriage? Yes. Well, it's a marital asset. It's yours. It's yours. And even some of our married couples, I have to correct the spouse where he'll say, my money. I'm like, your money? And he'll be like, oh yeah, you're right. Our money. Just like, oh my God, got to
I
have a
still,
therapist on call.
I still have some people who will come and go, well, I can prove that he was having an affair, so I'm going to get everything. I'm like, oh, I wish that were true.
Yeah, no, it's not. But what you can do with that, which is important, because we have a lot of this, um, it's called marital dissipation. And so if there were, household marital dollars going towards drugs, prostitutes, gambling, girlfriends, there's a nice long list. We have lots of things we can talk about it on a different podcast, but some of our clients, their partner has had other families without them even knowing it. And those dollars that went to support that family, those dollars that went towards that drug addiction or whatever, can be clawed back into um, the equitable distribution to compensate her for those dollars that went out the door. So, yeah, you're not going to, most states don't have fault divorce anymore. You're not going to get all the assets because, he did this or she did this. But it is important to know your rights if money has not been used appropriately in the marriage.
Well, and I think the only other time that we see that happen is that they would claim something was separate, and it could be separate income, and they're claiming that that is also separate. So there's usually either a narcissist on the other end kind of keeping us in court, or they have a claim that may be a little bit outrageous. Do you think there's any other times that you're seeing somebody kind of really stay in the court system? Because I haven't seen anybody get all of the assets. I've seen them destroy a lot of assets in the process, and usually that dissipates the wealth. But I think a lot of the strategies that you've said are completely beneficial in just understanding where you're at. I think the control and the abuse, though, sometimes just prevents them from ever getting some of those answers, and they have to go through the court system to get it.
Yes, that is something that I think is really important to talk about. There's a really big debate about whether or not situations where there's any type of abuse should be in the mediation process. Um, I don't have the answer for that, but I do have the answer that if there's not 100% disclosure during discovery, and that is the time period where financial information is being shared, um, there are times where you do need the court system. The court system is there to protect people, and there are times when you need that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, agree.
This has been such a great conversation. I know there's so many more questions. If someone wants to reach out to you, where can they find you?
So you can go to francisfinancial.com. We also have a really beautiful book that I wrote called Unveiling the Unspoken Truth, the financial challenges women face during and after divorce. And so right on the website, www.francisfinancial.com, you can go and download it. You can download a PDF. It's super easy to do, and it includes a lot of great information for anyone who is looking to just educate themselves, not sure what they want to do, but maybe potentially prepare for a separation or divorce. There's also great information for someone going through the divorce process, as well as after. So it's a great resource for anyone. And I mean, I know for me, whenever I am facing a struggle in my life, what gives me peace and comfort is getting educated. And so, just a huge thank you to both of you, Melissa and Victoria, for educating and for helping people through this process, which can be overwhelming. I think can be a little frightening, but knowledge is key, and that's what you're doing.
Well, thank you for that endorsement. And thanks so much for hopping on our podcast today. Thanks everyone for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.